Hello and welcome to Historic Newbridge Landing. My name is James Smith, a volunteer here with the Bergen County Historical Society, and today we're going to find out why this area is called historic. We're going to take you back today to explore some of the unique historic sites that separate this area of New Jersey and this colony really from what you might know of in the history books when it comes to our early American history. Originally colonized by the Dutch, this is really a Creole culture of different peoples from different parts of Europe that are going to settle and colonize and that ultimately make this area much more unique and less homogeneous. We're going to get a chance to explore different Jersey Dutch sandstone houses, which are unique in their architecture and are very different compared to other parts of the world. We're going to get a chance to sample different types of foodways. We're also going to find out about the military history and what makes this area unique. In 1744, the very area that I'm standing on would actually be surveyed for a road. With that road surveyed, a new bridge will be constructed, and that bridge will be vital when it comes to the American Revolution, because all overland traffic that leaves New York City will actually have to cross on and travel and traverse this very area that I'm standing on today. So join me as we find out and explore more about the unique history here at Historic Newbridge Landing.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Newbridge Landing. My name is Todd Braystead. I'm a past president of the Bergen County Historical Society, situated here at beautiful historic Newbridge Landing. And as you can tell by the name in our site, it involves a bridge. And that's what you can see behind me. Now, New Bridge, if you have a new bridge, you got to have an old bridge, right? Old Bridge was actually created a mile above here, and we're looking at the Hackensack River that's flowing in front of us. The Hackensack River runs through Bergen County in northern New Jersey and creates sort of a neck of land between the Hackensack and the Hudson River. All right, this bridge here behind me replaced one that was built in the early 1740s that connected what was then New Barbados Township here and across the river, which was Hackensack Township. This was the lowest bridge crossing over the Hackensack River. All right, so if you wanted to cross over the Hackensack, the only place you could do it other than here was a ferry beneath here. So this was a very, very important crossing point. Now, the bridge that you see behind me, obviously not from the 18th century. There were a number of bridges built between the early 1740s and into the 19th century. But the bridge that you see behind me is actually a late 19th century, they call a swing bridge, all right? It allows for river traffic. You actually had a river keeper, a bridge keeper, living by the river here, who could, on signal, move into the bridge, right in the middle of the bridge there, with a giant key, maneuver gears in the bridge that swung it left and right so ships could go up the river and down the river safely. Now, that's kind of cool. This bridge was in use from the 1889 up until 1955. That is when that bridge ceased to be the main drag going between what's now the town of River Edge and the town of New Milford over there. In 1955, they built a new road, built a new bridge. This bridge was closed. So the bridge itself has been maintained by the County of Bergen and ourselves. Now the bridge itself, in 1776, during the time of the American Revolution, right? We got a bridge here in the early 1740s, and we're jumping up ahead until 1776. The Americans are here in Bergen County. The British are taking New York City. And we have an American fortification 6 miles from here on the Palisades, Fort Lee, home today of, well, the town of Fort Lee. You can't cross the Hackensack, as we mentioned, below this point. So if British troops landed north of Fort Lee, they would have to get to this bridge before the British could cut them off. British are not idiots. Not then, not now. They landed 5,000 troops on the Palisades, climbing up and threatening Fort Lee. General Nathaniel Greene had to get his troops out of Fort Lee and to this bridge before the British could cut them off. Otherwise, almost 3,000 American troops would be cut off and captured. The Americans had just lost almost 3,000 troops across the river at Fort Washington. 2 disasters in 1 week would not make good newspaper headlines. The Americans were warned by a militia officer. They immediately fled Fort Lee, made their way to this bridge here. Well, at least the one that was there in 1776. They got here before the British did, crossed over. It was all recorded by Thomas Paine. Their first objective was to reach the bridge, which they did. And Washington then began what was known as the Great Retreat across New Jersey. But it all was predicated on the bridge that was here, the bridge that has become known as New Bridge. Okay, now we're going to jump ahead a little. 1776, important year here. The British have come, the Americans have gone. They actually captured New Bridge intact. The Americans fled, crossed through Bergen County, started the Great Retreat, crossed the Passaic River. This bridge would go on for several years, back and forth between the Americans and the British. The British didn't keep a garrison here, but really the Americans didn't either. They'd have little militia pickets, guards stationed around here. The British would come back in 1777, 1778, 1779. There'd be skirmishes here. There were actually 11 different encampments or skirmishes or battles right in the area of New Bridge. So the area we're talking about is a real battlefield. Right now we're coming to you from the middle of the bridge. We're right in the middle of the Hackensack River, as it were. And this was the scene of some incredible fighting in 1780. Now keep in mind, the American Revolution went on for 8 years. So there was lots of fighting. Just because we declare independence doesn't mean the British are going to go away. So we have a long war ahead of us. In 1780, the main American garrison was several miles to the northwest of here in Paramus. There's also some militia guys in Hackensack, a couple miles south of here. In March of 1780, during the midst of what they described as the hardest winter in human memory, the British were able to launch a 2-pronged attack on both Paramus and Hackensack, scooping up 65 prisoners in the process. Their plan didn't go completely as they envisioned it. The Americans were alerted. Some folks from Hackensack made it up to Paramus to warn Christopher Stewart, the commander of the Continental troops stationed up there, all 250 of them. Some of the inhabitants fled. Most of all, a guy by the name of Archibald Campbell, a tavern keeper in Hackensack, someone close and dear to my heart. So, the British, on their route to Paramus, stationed some guards here. They got to keep control of the bridge. Don't want to be cut off. We talked about before, this is the lowest crossing point on the Hackensack River. So the British go up, they raid Paramus, and all 600 of them are marching back to here. Close on their heels are a number of these Continental troops from Paramus, joined by some of the local militia. Who are the militia? The militia are the residents of the county. All right, they're the farmers, the tradesmen enrolled for part-time military duty. So they're on the heels of the British. The British are coming here. They got to get across this bridge. So they're coming here. The Americans are on their tail. They don't want the Americans to follow them. They still have a number of miles to march back to Fort Lee, then cross the river or go back down south to their posts. So they need to destroy this bridge, all right? The bridge that was here in 1776, 1780. So what do? The British on the other side are fighting furiously with the Americans right in front of the house, right where we're standing. So the British officers are like, we need to destroy this bridge. They say, go out there and destroy the bridge. And the soldiers are like, oh, I don't think so. So some of the officers themselves have to go out here and literally lift the planks up off of the bridge. How do you destroy a bridge quickly in the 18th century? You take the planks off it and you throw them into the river. So under the fire from right over there, literally 50, 60 yards away, guys firing muskets back and forth. These officers and a few men are tossing planks off of the bridge. One of the officers gets hit. 3 or 4 of the soldiers get hit. Miraculously, during the whole battle, only one guy dies on each side. And they render the bridge useless, right? The Americans can't cross over the bridge. The British are able to retire from here in safety. A month later, the British come back. They're still going for those troops up in Paramus. There's a cavalry battle right here on the bridge. right? The Americans have repaired the bridge. They always repair the bridge. The bridge was destroyed at least 4 times during the war. They charge up onto the bridge in the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning. There's an American officer on here, and he's fending off these cavalry troops going at him with sabers and whatnot, and he eventually surrenders. His men flee. The troops get up to Paramus. They do their business up there, defeat the Americans, come back to here in safety. The Americans are never able to get here to cut off the British, but it's an immense story. There's battles here. There's more that goes on after that. All right, there's encampments. Washington's here. He talked to councils of war, figuring out how to go back and take New York City again, which is not going to happen until the peace. But all of the great officers of the American Army are going to meet here in September of 1780. They all talk about being at the new bridge. This is still the new bridge. The old bridge is still a mile north of here. All right, and great and momentous events of the American Revolution would be here during 1780, including your friend and mine, Alexander Hamilton. So we have the obligatory Hamilton guy reference in here. So with that, the American Revolution will continue and go on to our independence. Yay.
Hi, good morning. My name is James Saradsky. I'm a living history volunteer with the Bergen County Historical Society. I'm here today portraying a soldier of George Washington's Continental Army and explaining how the soldiers cooked what food they had for rations. What you see behind me is what is called a camp kitchen. It was something that was used by all of the armies in the 1700s. General von Steuben, Baron von Steuben, when he wrote the drill manual and the instructions for the Army in 1779, also called for them to be used. And in this area in September of 1780, when the Stinrapi encampment was basically taking place in the area all around us from River Edge up until about Oradell, the Continental Army was encamped, and this is most likely and most probably how the Continental Army soldiers were cooking what rations they had. In the Continental Army, soldiers were broken down into groups of 6 men called a mess. Each of those groups of 6 would be issued a tent, they would be issued a hatchet, they would be issued a kettle, such as a sheet iron tin kettle, and they would be issued their food all together for the 6 men that one of the men would have to cook. In the 1700s, in the Continental Army, there was no such thing as army cooks that cooked large meals for large groups of men. Those 6 men were responsible for getting their rations and cooking their rations for themselves. So they would either pick one of the men who was a better cook than the other 5, or they may rotate the responsibility as to who would retrieve the rations from the quartermaster and then cook the rations. The typical Army ration was supposed to be each day a ½ pound of beef, a pound of bread, some dried vegetable, usually something like peas, some type of a grain like rice or barley. The soldiers would collect it and then bring it back to their camp kitchen that they had dug to cook their rations. So what you see here, our camp kitchen, is based on the type of camp kitchens that are shown in some illustrations, including Baron von Steuben's Army Manual of 1779. It's a circular trench that was dug. As the dirt was dug from the circular trench, you can see that it was thrown into the middle that forms this mound. And then at intervals around the wall of the pit, soldiers would use their shovel to dig a horizontal hole, which is where they would make their fire, and then they would dig from the top down, making basically a small chimney. So what you wound up having was basically like a small fireplace built into the camp kitchen. You built your fire in the fire hole. Through the chimney, you may need to use some branches, you may need to use some rocks. You would put whatever rations you had in your kettle, along with water and anything else that you may be able to find or forage that would add to what you were cooking. And then basically with your kettle over the fire, you had your fire here, the heat came up directed through the chimney, and it cooked your rations. A fire pit such as this, or a camp kitchen such as this, as you can see, could probably have at least 10 or 12 of these individual fireplaces where 10 or 12 messes of soldiers would be able to cook their rations for the day. So if you do the math, that's about 70 or 72 soldiers cooking their rations, and in the Continental Army, a company was about 72 soldiers. So this would be the camp cooking area for probably one Continental Army company. The benefit to doing it this way was that you had all the cooking taking place at one point, and because of the fire being built below with that small chimney that had the heat coming up to the pot, you tended to need less firewood to heat your rations. So it was a very efficient way that the soldiers could cook their rations. There are illustrations that show when the pit was dug out and the soldiers were cooking their rations, that by sitting here, you had a built-in place to sit while you waited for your rations to cook. And then when the Army was ready to move on, they would either fill it in or leave it in place. It would naturally eventually fill in from erosion. And when the Army moved to its next encampment or its next location, they would dig one either in a circular fashion, or if it's a smaller unit, or if they were in an area for a smaller period of time or shorter period of time, they may just dig a smaller trench for the few men that are on that patrol. So this is the way that the Continental Army soldiers cooked their rations. Of course, throughout the entire Revolutionary War, especially when the Army was in Bergen County in the fall of 1780, it was great to be able to build a camp kitchen. It was great to have the ability to set things up to cook, but the ever-present and ongoing problem was being able to get supplied. And there were accounts of soldiers who went sometimes 2 days, 3 days, and 4 days without being issued any food. So we may have had the kitchens available and ready to cook. The problem was finding something to cook. But again, this was the basic way that the Army cooked its provisions, fed itself, and kept itself nourished so that it could continue fighting the British.
Hello, we're standing in front of the Zabriskie von Steuben House. First constructed in 1752, it's made of indigenous red sandstone that is indigenous to Bergen County and this area of New Jersey. In 1767, the house would expand to its current size that we see today, partly because of a tide mill that was located on its property where farmers from all around could have their grain ground. And also being on the banks of the Hackensack River, 50-ton schooners would come right up to the front of this house and be loaded on the Hackensack River to have goods shipped down to New York. Eventually, the house would be expanded to a 12-room mansion house, which ultimately gave the Zabriskie family a very difficult decision on what they would do when the American Revolution would begin. At the onset of the Revolution, the Zabriskie family eventually would maintain loyalty to the British, and the house behind me would be confiscated by the state of New Jersey. Ultimately, it would be given to Baron von Steuben for his service during the American Revolution, where he would help to repair the house due to the constant wear and tear that it received during the Revolution. Eventually, von Steuben sells the house back to the Zabriskie family. Let's find out more about the house inside.
My name is Deborah Powell, and I'm a past president of the Bergen County Historical Society, museum collection chair, and commissioner on the Historic Newbridge Landing Park Commission. People have settled here for thousands of years. Our collections reflect that. We have artifacts going back, some of them found right here at Newbridge. This Charleville musket is among our most prized artifacts in the collections of the Bergen County Historical Society because it was found by a boy over 100 years ago at the river by the bridge. And it really connects Newbridge through an artifact to the American Revolution. These guns were imported by the thousands from the French for the American cause. And I invite you to make up a story about why the soldier dropped it. It's fully cocked. He was ready to fire it. We began collecting in 1902, and the artifacts are mostly about the people that lived here. Courtship and marriage are illustrated through this rare chip-carved wooden valentine, a spoonboard. Jan Zabriskie, not the Jan Zabriskie that lived in this house, but a farmer from Paramus, made this for Altie Hopper in 1731. The date and her initials are carved in the top. The circle pinwheels, wheels of fortune, are ancient decorations, and the 12 slots in the 3 rails, a spoon for every child they might have. Only a third of the Jersey Dutch were of Netherlandish descent. A fifth were Africans, the remainder being English, French, Scotch-Irish, and Scandinavians, and a couple of Polish Zabriskis. There were free blacks, but many were enslaved, and on exhibit here is a document for the purchase of a 45-year-old woman named Dean in 1804 for $75. We are publishing online over 30 slavery-related documents on our website. We have the opportunity to restore this house. A recent paint analysis done by Richbrook Conservation actually confirmed the 1752 date of the earliest part of the house. The Zabriskis prospered, and in about 1767 they were able to enlarge the house, and they added this whole north block and a gambrel roof, doubling the size of the house to 12 rooms, 7 fireplaces. This break in the ceiling is where that exterior stone wall was that was removed in the 1920s. Major General Baron von Steuben was so crucial to the Americans winning the war, he's considered by some only second to Washington in importance. Steuben served under Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, and he went on to famously train the troops at Valley Forge in 1778. This maquette was created by Albert Jägers in 1902 to enter a competition, and he went on to make a full-size bronze version that's across from the White House today. Steuben was gifted the Steuben House by the state of New Jersey, and by his own advertisement notes he restored the war-damaged house and ends up selling it back to the Zabriskie family in 1788. These 2 1783 watercolors by British painter Thomas Stothard are a recent and important donation, but so perfect for here because both Generals Washington and Greene were here during the war. The house is a version of an early split level, and if we go up the stairs, we can see the rooms run all the way across the back of the house. In this first room, we have a rare tavern sign that hung on an elm tree in Hohokus. Captain John Hopper and his wife Mary Cooper rebuilt the house after the war, and the inn on the Ramapo Stagecoach Road hung this sign. Jefferson is president when it's painted in 1802. You can see the date in the top. The Hoppers are making quite a political statement as Jefferson is embattled with the Federalists at the time. This is the only known tavern sign from this period from Bergen County. The Washington Room would have been the space that the general stayed in when he was at Newbridge during the Steam Rappy encampment in River Edge in 1780. If you notice the paneled wall here, the bead edge beams at the top, these are not boxed out, these are solid wood. And if you come over here, I can open up this door and you can look down and see the stairwell. The stairs run from the top of the house all the way to the bottom for servants to use. The Kaas here, this Dutch Kaas, is a cupboard, and it would have been used to store hand-woven linen and bedding. And we have our Bergen County coverlet collection stored in here. It's hand-woven on a jacquard loom. An inventory was made of the house when Jan Zabriskie Jr. died suddenly in 1793. He was a newlywed. So in the inventory, it does show, besides the long list of items in the store, the trading post that was here, it does show a cost listed in this house. So this is very appropriate. If you're a fan of Lafayette, we have preserved a chair with the original blue velvet upholstery. Lafayette sat in the chair when he stopped in Hackensack on his return visit to the country in 1825. He was much celebrated as he was the last surviving general of the war. He visited the grave of New Hampshire General Enoch Poor in Hackensack. Poor died during the Steenrappy encampment. If we go into the root cellar and dairy, we can see where we have an opportunity to restore the house, so we can open this part up for the public tours too. The first recorded visit by a tourist came in the summer of 1888 when a granddaughter of Revolutionary War tavern keeper Archibald Campbell drove up her carriage and asked to be shown the vaulted stone cellar where her grandfather had hidden to escape the British captors in 1780. These rooms run along the entire back of the house. Through Steuben's own records, we know that there was also a bakehouse and smokehouse on the property. Let's go upstairs to the garret, where we don't get to show people because of the winder stairs. We have our 15-foot canoe, dugout canoe, that a professor at Peabody Museum in 1915 thought, after examining it, that it was of, quote mark, Indian origin, though perhaps not prehistoric, end quote, as it does show marks with steel tools. The canoe, found in Hackensack, will be featured in our new museum building that we're fundraising for now. Artifacts require detective work to figure out their stories, and it would be fantastic to date it, probably through radiocarbon dating, as there's not enough wood to do dendrochronology. If we walk to the south end of the house, we can see the room we've identified as the miller's room. He could look out the window to keep an eye on the constantly changing tide cycle. If we look to the right, we can see the Demarest House Museum. That's where we're headed next.
Welcome to the Demarest House. The house is the best surviving example of a Bergen County Dutch sandstone cottage. It has 2 rooms and 2 entrance doors. It has a stoop, which is shaded by the eaves of the extended roof. The 2 doors were symmetrically planned, and they also allowed for privacy from the rooms of the house. The entrance doors are split in half, Dutch style, to allow airflow and light from the top, but keep the bottom closed so the local animal life could stay outside. Perishables were stored in the cellar, and non-perishables in the garret, or what we would call the attic. The house was originally in New Milford, and it was near the French cemetery. Through its life, it had a few different owners, but it was built in 1794 by Jacobus Paulison for his son and his new bride, John and Allie. And they moved into this house, and when 1853, when Jacobus died and there was an inventory done of all his possessions, the house was listed at a bedroom with a bed, bedding, and a cabinet, and the main room of the house. The fireplace room would have been the room of all the activity of the house. Right now there is no out kitchen, so the fireplace is set up with different utensils for preparing a meal, adjusting the height of the pots close to the fire or further away for how much cooking you want to do, how quickly. A toaster, different size pots. Many times the pots were on legs to keep them off the coals, to prevent them from burning. The fireplace is shallow back then, and it did put some heat into the room. In this room, we have quite a few items that are Dutch style, and many of them belong to the Demarest family. This is called a bacon settle, and it was brought over here, first of all, seating, storage in the seats, and in the back, the doors open, and there are 6 hooks, and they cured their meat in the back of this piece. Over here, it was quite common back then, if you knew how to weave and do things with your fabrics. If you had a sheep, these utensils would be used for cording the wool from the sheep. And then you have the spinning wheels. The large one is for wool, and the small one is for working with flax. These different items would be part of that process. That is a winder for the yarn. The table would have been an essential part of the family. And this table, the top is removable. Because as I said, if you had an out kitchen, you needed a surface to work on. So you could take the top off the table, bring it to your out kitchen, do your prep, carry the top back in and serve your family. There's also in this room a dough box. Same type of thing. The top, they would work on making the dough for the bread, lift the top, put the dough in the box and leave it to rise until it was ready to be baked. They would put it on top of the top again and carry it to the oven. This is a Demarest style chair, and these are Bergen County chairs, and you can tell by the finial and the fact that it has a rush seat. In the second room is the bedroom. In that room we have a large kaas. A kaas is a Dutch term they used for their tall storage cabinets. One of their most prized possessions was their linens. They were not bought, you had to make them. It took a long time, a lot of effort, a lot of ability. So they would store them in their best place, which would be their storage cabinet or kaas. We have a baby cradle. We have the oldest chair known in Bergen County, and it was made in 1698 in that room. We have a hope chest, which we call a hope chest, and it belonged, I believe the date is 1794, and it's a teal green. It's quite lovely, and the future bride's name is on the front and the date. All in all, the home is called the starter home. And they were popular from approximately 1790 to 1820. And then they went into different styles, less popular. We're very happy to have it here at Historic Newbridge Landing, and we hope that you'll come someday and tour it and see all the items for yourself. Thank you for joining us.
Let's go inside the Campbell Christie house now. Before we do, as we approach the house, you can see this tavern tree planted right here, and it's actually a Princeton elm. And it was deliberately planted to help with the interpretation of the site, because if you remember, we talked about the tavern sign from Hohokus back in the Steuben house. And as we approach over here, you can see the cut red sandstone of the Campbell Christie house. Let's go inside and find out more.
Irish immigrant Willem Campbell and his wife Elizabeth Demarest of Schralenberg owned 33 acres of improved property not far from here in the northeast corner of the Henley Avenue and River Road in New Milford. When their son Jacob got married in 1774, they gave him 3 acres of land, and Jacob built for his new wife a stone house based on a very common style, center hall colonial with 4 rooms on the first floor, a full basement, a full cellar, and a garret upstairs, a house with a gambrel roof. So by 1780, this was still a fairly new house, and the tax ratables showed that Jacob Campbell was both a blacksmith and a tavern owner. By 1776, Jacob and 3 of his brothers were privates in the Bergen militia. And when Willem died in 1793, Jacob and his brothers had to sell the homes that they owned in order to settle Willem's final will and estate. So the house was purchased by John J. Christie in 1796, where it was known as the Tavern of John Christie. And the Christie family owned the house for nearly a century. One of the most famous residents of the house was J. Walter Christie, and he was somewhat of an inventor and a mechanical genius. He built racing cars, he held the world record for speed, and he went on to invent the automotive front-wheel drive, which was used in fire engines back at the turn of the last century. He's best known as the father of the modern tank, having developed the design in 1930 for high-speed tanks that moved optionally on wheels or track. The house was purchased by a few other people until it was finally slated for destruction. And in 1977, the Bergen County Historical Society had it moved here. We've had a lot of visitors stop in who tell us that they remember the day when the roads were blocked and the roof and second floor were removed, but the first floor, all of stone, was loaded onto a flatbed truck and driven here the few miles from New Milford to this site. We interpret this house as a tavern, and I'm standing here by the tavern bar. The gate would come down so that the tavern keeper could lock up his alcohol for the night when he finally went to bed, and his guests would have access to the several rooms on the first floor. We offer refreshments, sometimes beverages, not always alcoholic, but once in a while we do have wine or beer served for special events. And we also have a gift shop where people spend a lot of their time when they come to visit us. So this is the Campbell Christie house.
Good day, welcome to the Out Kitchen. We interpret this building as the kitchen for the Campbell Christie Tavern, which is just across the path from this building. One of the main features we have here is our jamless fireplace. What's unique about it, Maddie?
It's unique. Well, you have an entire brick floor, and this floor enables us to put Dutch ovens that we cook our meals in all over this whole floor, and we can cook several dishes at the same time, supplying different meals.
We also have a bar across the top where we can hang a variety of pots. We've done beef stew in here for 50 without any issue. Today we're cooking some Dutch recipes. Our ancestors here were mainly Dutch. We always research our recipes. They come from 18th century sources. We use as close to 18th century ingredients as we can get. We also use the cooking methods and cooking tools like they would have used in the 18th century. So my Dutch recipe today is pancakes. They are slightly different than what you're used to. A little denser, not quite as fluffy. And what makes them unique is that they have in them cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, and cloves, which are not things we normally think of as going into a pancake. We can also tie the pancake to Newbridge Landing. Down at the mill, down by the river at the Zabriskis, they did mill flour, so we would source our flour from the local mill. In addition to this, we're going to do some preserving.
We are preserving strawberries today. Strawberries were a native fruit to this area, and the soil in New Jersey is just perfect for growing them. The Native Americans would harvest them and actually put them into their cornmeal to make their breads. Now, strawberries have such a short growing season that we're preserving some today that we're going to be using possibly next February.
Yep.
Or we can use them with the pancakes if we wanted to. So the idea is to use them in a crock. Most things were preserved in a crock. You would have your sugar and you would grind it down. You would put a layer of sugar inside your crock. You would add your cut strawberries. These are raw, they're not cooked.
Why?
And I'll show you some strawberries.
How long will they sit? How long will they last?
These are probably good for a good 6 months, so we will probably have them for a special occasion come February.
Okay. And when you seal the jar, growing up, we sealed preserves with wax. How do you seal it to keep the air out?
Well, okay. You would take a piece of, they would call writing paper, and soak it in some brandy and layer that on top of the strawberries and put a lid on it, and that would keep it sealed. The brandy would help keep it from getting moldy. Every so often you'd have to open it up and you would have to check it to make sure the strawberries were still good. And then reseal it.
I can't wait till we can eat them in February.
That'll be good.
On behalf of the Bergen County Historical Society, we thank you so much for visiting historic Newbridge Landing today as part of America's Summer Road Trip, and hopefully we encourage you to come back to historic Newbridge Landing. In the future, we plan to construct a modern 21st century museum building that will help to add to the unique story that is here in Bergen County and this part of New Jersey. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the day for America's Summer Road Trip.
When mighty roast beef was the Englishman's food, it ennobled our veins and enriched our blood. Our soldiers were brave and our courtiers were good. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef. But since we have learned from all-conquering France to eat their ragouts as well as to dance, we are fed up with nothing but vain complaisance. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef. Our fathers of old were robust, stout, and strong, and kept open house with good cheer all day long, which made their plump tenants rejoice in this song. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef. But now we are dwindled to what shall I name? A sneaking poor race half begotten and tame, who sully those honors that once shone in fame. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef. When good Queen Elizabeth sat on the throne, ere coffee and tea and such slipsticks were known, the world was in terror if e'er she did frown. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef. In those days, if fleets did presume on the main, they seldom or never returned back again, as witness the vaunting armada of Spain. Oh, the roast beef of old England and old English roast beef.
And the landsman look pale, never heed him, but toss off the glass to a favorite lass. To America, commerce and freedom. To America, commerce and freedom. But when we arrived in sight of land, or safe in port rejoicing, our ship we moored, our sails we had, was out the boat is hoisting. With cheerful hearts ashore we reach, our friends delighted greet us, and tripping lightly o'er the breach, the pretty lasses meet us. When the full flowing bowl enlivens the soul, two-footed we merrily lead 'em, and each bonny lass will drink her glass. To America, commerce and freedom. To America, commerce and freedom. Our prize is sold, the cheap we share, and gladly we receive it. And when we meet a brother tour that wants, we freely give it. No freeborn sailor yet had store, but cheerfully would lend it. And when 'tis gone to sea for more, we earn it but to spend it. Then drink round, my boys, 'tis the first of our joys, to relieve the distressed, clothe and feed 'em. 'Tis a duty we share with the brave and the fair, in this land of commerce and freedom, in this land of commerce and freedom.